now we will move into the message. So for those of you who don't know, we recently changed our name to Renovation Church. We adopted the identity on April 2nd of Renovation Church. And now, since we've done that, I have gotten tons of questions from people in our community. The main one is, so was that like a marketing thing? Like that's actually the primary question that I get from people. And you know what? I love it when people ask me this question because I get to defy their expectations to a certain degree. I get to explain how actually, no, we changed our name. The reason behind that was primarily for us. Right? I get to explain that our church was acknowledging ways that we have been falling short, ways that we want to do better, and that this name change is helping kind of aim us in a direction of what better looks like. I get to explain how we are acknowledging that all of us need to be renewed by Jesus. We need the experience of Jesus' renewal, and then we need to be part of extending that renewal to other people. I get to explain how this picture of things being renovated helps us imagine how we might live out our own life and existence as Jesus followers in this corner of the suburbs. And so after a couple of weeks, we spent some time looking at Jesus' resurrection, looking at Easter, celebrating that. We are going to take the next 3 weeks to dive deep into what is this identity that we have adopted together as a church. Right? Who is Renovation Church and what are we trying to accomplish? So after a long process of feedback and discussion that we have the elders engaged with the congregation in, that we kind of discussed for a long time, we have kind of honed in on 3 core values that articulate who we are and what we are trying to accomplish. These 3 values, our values are bless, belong, and become. Our values are bless, belong, and become. The next 3 weeks are all about this new identity and what it means, what it looks like for us to live out this identity that God is calling us to. And so today we start with the first one. We start with bless. So first of all, does anyone relate to this statement? The longer I observe what's happening in the world, the more out of place I feel. Do you relate to that statement? You might have countless examples of how you relate to that statement. And someone else might have some other ideas and examples that are actually different from yours for why they feel like they don't fit in this world. But I think it can be easy to look at the world and get the sense that, wow, you know, in a significant way, I sense that I kind of don't belong here. So can we talk about how that feels for just a second? Right? It can feel, especially if you get the sense that at one point you belonged, but now you belong less, right? You kind of start to feel like things are falling apart. Right? It feels like things that were once certain for you are now slipping away from you. It feels like everyone else was given some operating manual for how to live their life, but that somehow you got skipped and being given that operating manual. And so you see everybody else going kind of a different way than you would be inclined to go. It feels like the whole world may be ready to turn against you once they realize the extent to which you are actually not going the way that they're going. So can I tell you then now what I am not here to do this morning? I am not here primarily to tell you why you feel out of place. That's not what I'm going to do. I am not here to list all of the reasons and cultural realities that might have made you feel more like an outsider than you ever have before in your life. I'm not here to decry our culture and talk about the degrading of society. I'm not here to tell you how there are certain evil people in the world and how their agenda is causing you to feel more isolated and like a stranger. I'm not here to lament the tragedy of smartphones and social media and talk about the damage that they have done. I'm not here to do any of that. I am here primarily for one reason this morning, to help us hear how Jesus calls us to respond to our out-of-placeness in society, to this out-of-placeness experience, right? Because Jesus kind of expected that it would be the case. Like, if the apostles and Jesus looked at us and heard us saying, well, gosh, this is such a disappointment. We just don't have a place. We feel out of place. Jesus would say, that's kind of what I told you was going to happen. Right? Like that was the expectation. That was the deal. That's what you signed up for. Right? So how then does he want us to respond to our out-of-placeness experience? So in 1 Peter, we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. The Apostle Peter, he's writing to Christians who are scattered in various cities and towns throughout the known world, and his opening address to them is he addresses them as people who are strangers and sojourners. Other words that you might hear used for this are foreigners, aliens, people who feel out of place, people who sense that they do not belong in the world. That's how he opens his address to them. He writes to them and he's saying, hey, I know that you feel out of place. I recognize that you feel out of place. And Peter, he's not surprised by this reality. He's not lamenting the fact that they don't belong. He wastes no ink blaming people who make them feel like they don't belong. He doesn't try to convince them that particular people are responsible for them not belonging. He acknowledges a simple reality. If you follow Jesus, you will always be out of place in the world. If you truly follow Jesus, you will always be out of place in the world. And in the passage that we find ourselves in this morning, Peter, he's getting around to telling these Christians what they are to do about this reality. As those who indeed are a people who do not belong, how does Jesus want you to respond as those who are out of place? So 1 Peter 3, 8 and 9 says this. It first says in verse 8, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Peter lists 5 characteristics that should describe us. Now, I want you to notice with me the last 4 of those 5 characteristics. Because what they all involve, each of them, the last 4 of those 5 characteristics, each involve generous ways of relating to other people. They each of them involve generous ways of relating to other people. The word sympathy, it literally means, emotional withness, right? To be able to sit with someone in the middle of a hard emotional experience. Are you willing to meet them in that place? Brotherly love, it means a generous, welcoming concern for other people. Right, and so this is, by the way, not just people in the church, right? We can read that word brotherly and think that he's talking about relationships in the church, but this is actually speaking of the quality of our love for all people, right? The kind of love that we're called to have for all people, a brotherly love, right? And then he says tender-hearted, right? That is a simple willingness to accept another person. When the Apostle Paul uses this word, what he talks about is he talks about how you need to be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, right? The implication is there are things that somebody else that is going to do that are going to offend you and going to drive you crazy and going to bother you, and to be tender-hearted means that you have a space for acceptance of that person. Right? So he says tender-hearted. And then he says have a humble mind. A humble mind is a willingness to recognize that there is actually something that you can learn from every person. Right? No matter what you might think of them right now. No matter what kind of exclusion you think you experience because of what they represent. So 4 out of the 5 words that Peter lists here are different ways of saying this. Your way of relating to others should be unusually generous. It should be unusually generous. Now, is that not the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard? Like that, Peter is looking at Christians and saying something is happening to the people out there in the world, and it's making you feel like you don't belong. They're making you feel like you don't belong. Now, what is your human impulse when you live in the midst of a place where people make you feel like you don't belong? What is the impulse in the core of your soul? You say, well, I'm going to get ready to fight, right? I'm going to put up my defenses, right? I'm going to prepare for my verbal assault of those who are choosing to exclude me. So that might be one way of responding. The other way of responding is, I'm going to hide. I'm going to shrink away. I'm going to disengage. I'm going to stay back. I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to go where it's safe. And this is dumb. Peter doesn't tell us to do either of those things. Those things make perfectly logical sense in my mind, but he doesn't tell us to do those things. He says, respond to your out-of-placeness like this. Heap generosity on the people and places that make you feel out of place. So why is he justified in telling us to respond like that? Why is he justified in insisting that we give them, whoever them is to you, that we give them the benefit of the doubt? Why is he justified in saying, when you open your mouths about them, speak and think with humility? Why is he justified in saying, make space at your table for people who are making you feel excluded? Why is he justified in saying, be generous to those who make you feel out of place? Well, if you look at chapters 1 and 2, which we're not doing this morning, but if you go back and look at chapters 1 and 2 of 1 Peter, he tells them why. He says, Jesus has been generous to you, right? Chapters 1 and 2 are all about how Jesus has been so remarkably generous to us. That's why we opened our worship service this morning with that passage. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for check. Oh, there we go. Good response. Excellent. Who by God's power are being guarded through faith for salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it's tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. And then he spends the next 2 chapters riffing on that idea, just going deeper and deeper and deeper. Jesus has been so remarkably generous to you. And so can I tell you Peter's logic in chapter 3 then? This is Peter's logic. Peter's like, guys, this is how good Jesus has been to you. He's been so kind and so patient and so abundantly generous that I don't care if they are murdering you. You be generous to them. If you follow his line of thinking, that's how far he takes it. I don't care if they would have you die. You be generous to them. And the reason he can say that is because he views himself and his Jewish counterparts as those responsible for the Lord's death. Right? Those for whom Jesus had to die. And Jesus' generosity extended beyond his death to those who called themselves his enemies, to those who would be responsible for his death. So Peter says, I don't care if they're murdering you, you be generous to them. And yes, that is extreme. You might hear that and go, okay, that's a little too far. Like, seriously, that's the way that feels. But that is the logic that is informing all of his words, and he's simply following Jesus' logic from the Sermon on the Mount. You remember when Jesus talked about that stuff? He said, you have heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, you turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Now, none of that means that you are going to change your message. Right? You still stand on the truth. But you do so with the intention of being generous toward the people with whom you feel like an outsider. Okay, so Peter goes on in verse 9. He says, do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you are called, that you may obtain a blessing. So God's promise to Abraham, but God came about at the very beginning, like when he was doing something new in the world, he came to Abraham and he said to Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation. You are going to be a people that I set aside for me. And then he told Abraham not only that he would be a father of a great nation, that he would be a father of many nations, and that all the families of the earth would be blessed through Abraham. He assigned to the children of Abraham the responsibility of blessing the world. Now, I don't have time to get into all of this, but if you didn't know, if you are a believer in Jesus, that means you are now a child of Abraham, right? That's what that means. So God's plan of blessing the world is now being extended through you. So let's talk about what it means to bless. To bless means this: to help others experience the nearness and favor of God. That is what it is to bless, to help others experience the nearness and favor of God. And Peter says, if you are a believer in Jesus, part of the blessing that you get to be a part of, right? Because if you keep reading, he says you bless, and then as you bless, you receive a blessing, right? Part of the blessing that you get to be a part of is that you get to help people among whom you feel out of place experience an awareness of God's love for them and nearness to them. Right? That is a blessing that you get to participate in, because that's what God did for you. Right? By nature, you are not welcoming to God. You did not seek for God. You were concerned for yourself and your own way and would have preferred to be unshackled from God's way. And through a series of circumstances, God was merciful and gracious to show you that he loves you and that he wants to extend to you a blessing in Jesus despite your constant animosity towards him. And eventually, that blessing from God brought you to recognize your need for Jesus to be Lord and Savior of your life. And you know what? There are so many people in the world who have not had the experience that you have had. Right? They are disconnected and desperate to have an awareness of God. They are in need of hope. They are in need of renovation. And though you might look at them and say, they make me feel out of place, Peter says, it is a gift to bless others and help them experience the nearness and favor of God. So go with me on this. Jesus and Peter both are saying that we have tools to use with people in places where we feel out of place. Those tools are not primarily political power to force your way of life onto other people. Those tools are not slander of the people who make you feel like an outsider. Those tools are not gathering a coalition of people to demonize those who make you feel like an outsider. The tool that you have to respond when you feel like an outsider is blessing. That's what you have. And in fact, your responsibility when you feel like an outsider is to bless them. Okay, so let's talk about why this is a major emphasis in our values as a church and then how we apply it. So as our culture changes, the churches and Christians that will effectively draw others into faith are churches that learn to bless even when we feel increasingly out of place. So this is why, as we were developing our new identity, we came to discover the significant role that hospitality needs to play in the ways that we interact with the world around us. Right, both corporately and individually. If we were going to commit ourselves to be the best at one thing, we wanted to figure out, what does it look like for us to become the most hospitable people? Right? Can we make people who are strangers feel welcome and experience God's love in the same way that he has made us feel welcome and experience his love? So as we were having that conversation, we came across this word, bless. Now, there are other pastors and ministry leaders who have discovered similar things to what we've discovered, and the word bless has actually arisen as a word to help us respond when we feel increasingly out of place. So this is how bless works for us. Bless is something intentional. And this is, for what it's worth, we're moving more into practical, some equipping pieces for you. What do these things mean? Bless is something that intentional that we do for people who are on something called our frank list. So in case you're wondering, the ministry leaders in this church have been talking now for several months about how can we take ownership of these values even now as we're conversing and developing them, so that as we present them to the larger body, we are starting to employ them even in our personal practices. Right, so first I'm going to talk about the frank list, and then I will talk about bless. So these are not tools that we developed. These are tools that we have been using from other generous and smart ministry leaders. And so when we talk about a frank list, that is developed by a guy named Rick Richardson. And when we talk about bless, the idea of bless is actually developed by John and Dave Ferguson. All three of those people are people who live within 45 minutes of this church. John and Dave planted a church down in Naperville. And so all of these tools are very helpful tools for us as we think about how to be blessings in the place that we have. So let's talk about the frank list first. A frank list is a way of helping you discern the people that God has placed in your sphere of influence and is giving you the opportunity to bless. That's what the frank list is. So the frank approach, which there's this weird joke, I don't get it, but people have been saying franc because that's what it looks like, the franc list, so whatever. So the franc approach, these are your friends, relatives, acquaintances, neighbors, and coworkers. So this tool does for us two things. First, it helps us to imagine and name specific people. So when I come up and I preach about loving your neighbor, it's very easy to think generally about loving the people that you pass by and walk by on a day-to-day basis. What this does for us is to help us have specific names of the people that God is calling us to love and bless and be generous towards. Right, so that's the first thing it does. The second thing that it does is it helps us to imagine what it looks like to build deeper relationships with these people, so that those who might be the furthest extent out from us might be drawn into the realm of friendship. What does it look like for that to take place? So that's what the purpose of these circles is. It helps us to imagine kind of an inward movement, a building of relationship, a deepening of relationship with people, that we might more effectively be able to bless them. So that's the frank list. Now let's talk about bless. If you want to dig deeper into this, there's a book called Bless by John and Dave Ferguson. If you want to write that down, feel free to, and you can read that book deeper. I imagine sometime in the next year we're also going to be doing a sermon series on each of these 5 pieces. But bless is an acronym that describes 5 different practices that we can engage to help people on our frank list experience the nearness and favor of God. So 5 blessed practices. B, let's start with B. B is to begin with prayer. The beginning of blessing anyone is a recognition that God is the one who is doing the blessing and intervening in lives. He creates opportunities for deeper conversation. He helps a person experience his nearness and favor. So whenever we talk about the steps that we might take to intentionally bless others, we first need to make sure that this is an issue that we are committing to prayer, that we're able to discern with God's help the next best steps of blessing to take, and that we're constantly relying on His power and not our own effort. So remember this. Prayer is going to be a powerful tool for your relationship with others as that relationship deepens. Right? Because undoubtedly a circumstance will present itself in a person's life that they need you to pray for. And you have the opportunity to give them the special blessing of a sense that God is drawing near to them by praying for them and helping them see that God is actually concerned about their situation. Right, so that's B, begin with prayer. L is listen with compassion. We've talked a lot about listening in terms of how we relate to others. When you take the time to actively listen to another person, you give them the gift of feeling like they are valuable, feeling like they are worthy of your time and attention. Right? So recent research has suggested that unchurched people are remarkably more willing to engage in deep spiritual conversation than we would give them credit for. They just really don't want to engage in those conversations with Christians. Right? They don't want to talk to Christians about it. Why? Because they know that many of them know Christians who are unwilling to let them come to their own conclusions. They believe that spiritual conversations with Christians will be unhelpful because they've experienced the following. Number one, Christians who appear to have all the answers. Christians who are quick to point out inconsistencies in other people's perspectives. And Christians who are good at debating topics, right? They're expecting that if they engage with a Christian, that they're going to be debated about what they think. And conversely, 62% of non-Christians and lapsed Christians say that a person who listens without judgment would be the best person to talk to about faith. So in a culture full of people quick to express their own opinion, Christianity can simply appear to be another opinion-producing agenda machine. But what if, instead of seeking to quickly challenge a point of view that we disagree with, we were willing to, on the first hand, seek to understand what somebody else's perspective is and give concern and time to them and want to hear what they think, and then maybe we earn capital in that process to gain a hearing for what it is that we might think. Okay, that's L, listen with compassion. E, eat with them. We spent almost all of 2022 talking about sharing tables together, making space for other people at our tables. We talked about how we can use our tables intentionally as a place to welcome other people and express Jesus' hospitality through us. We talked about how tables are a great way to deepen relationships, to be recognizing God's presence among us, and finding opportunities to share a table with someone is a great way to deepen, not only deepen your relationship, but it's a great way to extend blessing to that person. S, serve them. In our culture, I would also allow this. I would say allow them to serve you. Right? So serve them and allow them to serve you. How can you create space to love and care for other people? Do you have a neighbor who is sick, who needs reassurance that people are praying for you? Do you have elderly neighbors who need help with their yard work? Do you have a friend who is going through a difficult time and needs help around the house, right? Conversely, can you give someone the gift of feeling like they're valuable enough to you that you are willing to ask them help in a time of need? Right? Can you help another person feel like they are needed and wanted by giving the blessing and the opportunity of them being able to help their friend or neighbor? So these things happen less and less in our culture, but when we do them, they have the power to help people experience connection and experience a sense that God is drawing near to them. Finally, S, share your story. As you build relationships, you will undoubtedly have opportunities to help someone get to know you. Right? Your task and your responsibility is to simply be authentic and transparent about who you are. And if you're a believer in Jesus, the most significant thing that has happened to you is that Jesus has given you the opportunity for new life. Right? That he is working his renewal into your life. That his life, death, and resurrection have utterly changed the trajectory of your life. Right? That's what we put on the wall out there. We are stories God is writing about Jesus making things new. So much of our story should be about how Jesus makes things new and is making things new inside of us and around us. So if you're able to share vulnerably, authentically, with the people that you're interacting with about what it is that Jesus is doing inside of you, that is an invitation to them that they might be able to experience God intervening in their life in some way as well. So as Peter, he talks for a lot longer. He goes on and engages at a deeper level of looking at what it looks like to really bless others. But he says this, and I want you to really tune into these words. In 1 Peter 3:13-15, he says, "Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good?" His basic point is, they may harm your body, but if you are zealous for what is good, you are on the Lord's side. You're doing what the Lord wants, right? "But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. So have no fear of them, nor be troubled." Verse 15, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. That's an important little qualifier there at the end. Okay, so when we talk about bless as a core value of our identity, that's essentially what we're talking about. So I have one more tool for us. Out in the foyer, there is a bulletin board that has the word bless written above it. Right, and that bless bulletin board has 3 resources underneath it. The first is a resource for prayer. Periodically, we are going to change out this resource for prayer. But the reality is, as we seek to love and extend blessing to those who are in our spheres of influence, prayer is one of the most important pieces of that. And so this resource on prayer is prayers that birth revival, right? But that we're going to put out various kinds and periodically change that out so there are different ways to pray. So take these resources, use them as you engage in prayer for your friends and your neighbors. That's the first thing I want to draw your attention to. The second thing I want to draw your attention to is this bless bookmark, right? So this is a tool for you. On the back is a place for you to write the names of your friends, relatives, acquaintances, neighbors, or coworkers. And on the other side is a place for you to write next steps that you might take with each of them. So for each of those steps, B, begin with prayer, L, listen with compassion. Write down who you're going to take a next step with, how you're going to take that next step. That's what this is. And this keeps it, as you put it in your Bible or whatever you use, this will keep these ideas in front of you so that you're aware of, okay, how can I be taking intentional steps because God has called me to be a blessing to those around me. All right, there's that piece. And then the final piece is, as you build relationships with people, you might think, I think this person could really use a community of faith now. Like, I think it might be time for them to step into that. And there are these invitations to church right out there, right? To say, hey, come join us on a Sunday morning. Come worship with us. This could be a really good thing for you as we're talking about Jesus and what it means that you're getting to know him, right? This could be a good thing. So there are invitations to church out there as well. That bless board is intended as a place, a resource for you to be able to come to and figure out ways and imagine ways and dream about ways that you can reach out to your friends and your neighbors. Okay, so what? Number 1, Crossroads is our collective way of living out bless. Right, Crossroads had their vision dinner on Friday night. Crossroads, if you don't know, Crossroads is an international ministry now that we get to partner with. They help us partner with 2 elementary schools in our local area where we get to go at the end of the school day into the elementary school, into the gym, and we get to tell them truths about who Jesus is and what the Bible says and what God is inviting them into. Right, we get to go and literally take territory and public space and use it to proclaim the gospel to kids. It is an amazing blessing. So they had their vision dinner on Friday night, and I just got this beautiful reminder of why it is that we do Crossroads. So while we might increasingly say that, education is a realm where we and our values are making us increasingly feel like outsiders, we feel like our influence is being pushed out. The reality is today, this week and this whole school year, we've been going in with Crossroads and going in places where we might say, oh, they're trying to push our influence out, but we're going in there and we're inviting kids to be a part of this program where we get to proclaim truths about who Jesus is. Right? We get to show kids that they are loved in the name of Jesus. Kids get to hear about how Jesus makes things new. Kids get to eat a snack and share time together. Kids get to build relationships with their leaders who are pouring into them and love them. Kids are served with the opportunity to have fun at the end of their day after they spent all of this time sitting in a classroom. And so what an opportunity that Crossroads is for us to be able to pour into, especially when a handful of these kids are dealing with really challenging situations, right? Situations that we can barely begin to imagine. Kids today are needing to grow up faster and confronted with more difficult decisions than any of us could have ever been imagined being confronted with that early in our lives. Challenges increasing all the time, and Crossroads gives us the opportunity to be able to bless those kids at Sycamore Trails and Horizon. So that's the first so what. I just say that this is our opportunity. This is the way that we have seen to bless our community. Now, reality is the Lord may show us another way that we collectively as a church can bless our community. But as we see it right now, Crossroads is the primary way that he has given us. The second, so what is this? Simply a question. Who do you need to bless? Right? Be specific. If I could just give you one nugget, one thing to take away with this, be specific. There are people, specific people who have names and faces, people who need the hope of a restored relationship with God. So who's on your frank list? Who do you need to be intentional with to bless them and to give them the opportunity to know Jesus? I would invite you to not waste your time with this, to not say, you know what, I'm going to get around to that later, because this is the reality. You have been so generously, remarkably blessed by Jesus. And that blessing is not meant to stop with you. Right? He intends for you to extend it to others. So church, would you pray with me, please? Father, I pray for my brothers and sisters in this room. Father, I pray for everybody who is gaining a sense that you are drawing near to them. Lord, I pray that you would bless them with an awareness and an understanding of the people it is in their life who you are calling them to, the people that you are calling them to reach, the people you are calling them to be intentional, to bless, and to share stories, and to stand on truth, and to be willing to be compassionate with them, to be generous with them, to heap generosity in places where we even feel like we may not necessarily belong. Father, we need your equipping for this, and so we trust you to give us that equipping, but more than that, Lord, I pray that as we enter into communion, often we struggle with this. We struggle with stepping into the things that you're calling us to because we just don't have the best picture of how great it is, the things that you have accomplished for us. And so my prayer right now is that as we talk about what it means that you loved us, that you were willing to die for us, that you were willing to endure suffering and torment because of our sin and our failure, that would help us to understand the means by which and the extent to which you are calling us to be a blessing to others. Jesus, thank you. We pray these things in your name.